The following presentation is a gift from the team at Streamline Publishing, publishers of Fine Art Connoisseur, Plein Air Magazine, and weekly newsletters Fine Art Today, Realism Today, Plein Air Today, and American Watercolor, and events, the Plein Air Convention and the Figurative Art Convention. We offer over 400 different art instruction tutorials and ultra high-quality video by the world's leading artists. If you like what you see, help us support our artists and our team with your purchase. Each video aired has a special discount code for today only in the comments section with a link to the video offered. And to see everything we do, or if you want to receive notice of new releases, new products, and new events for artists, simply click the other link, which says, "See everything we do." Thank you.
Hi, I'm Eric Rhodes with Fine Art Connoisseur and Plein Air magazines. I'm always on the hunt for the best artists to do videos, people who have something that can really help us learn and grow. One of the things I discovered about Mark Fehlman is because of his architectural background, he has implemented design systems in making paintings that make his paintings rock, and they will make your paintings rock too. I thought you'd like to see a little segment from this video.
Hi, I'm Mark Fehlman, and like many of you, painting is my second career. I've been painting full-time for about 15 years now, and during that time, there's been many moments when I felt I wasn't making enough progress. I really thought about it a lot. Then I had one of Oprah's aha moments. I realized that I had to go back and relearn the fundamentals of painting. In this video, I want to share with you powerful strategies that are going to make your paintings dramatically better. To get the benefits of these strategies, you have to employ them in practically every step of your design and painting process. As you start to utilize these strategies, you'll begin to see the patterns and silhouettes that we will be talking about in this video. You will notice light and dark shapes in the environment. You'll start to pay attention to the shapes of trees, of clouds, and buildings. Your powers of observation and visual memory will become finely tuned. I want to ask you an important question. How badly do you want to become a better artist? Are you willing to work hard at your craft? In this video, I'm going to share with you the things I've learned over the 15 years that I've been painting now. I've been where you are, wherever you are in the process, because I've seen it all. I want to make things as clear as possible so that you can replicate these in your work. As you digest this information, if you have any questions, I want you to go to my website and send me the question. I'll try to get back to you as fast as possible. My website is www.markfehlman.com. But you can't just watch this video and expect to get immediately better. Over the next few months, review segments of this video and start to make these fundamentals a part of your process. Painting has become my passion. I never regret leaving my first career in architecture to become an artist. So let's get into it. I want to share with you a key tip that hopefully is going to change your whole approach to the painting process. It's rarely talked about, but if you embrace this, it's going to make the price that you paid for this video one of the best investments you've ever made. I've found that the secret to creating a powerful painting, are you ready for this? A powerful painting is 75% preparation and 25% painting process. Rarely do we think this way. Let me say that again. 75% is in the preparation. That includes studies, the concept drawing, the color theory, the fundamentals that you utilized to get ready to paint. For a long time, I thought preparation was putting on my apron, putting the photographs on my computer, laying out my paint, and putting the canvas on the easel. But it's really a lot more than that. I believe that great work is built. Think of it like a building. The process is long. When a developer wants to build a building, they have to go through a long process. They acquire the land. They hire the architect to do the plans. They hire a contractor to build the building, and then he gets a permit. They grade the land, they put in the foundation, and raise the steel. All that is the 75%. The 25% is the exterior skin of the building, the interior design, the lighting, the landscape. Without the well-executed 75%, the 25% will never be successful. Of course, I look at it this way because I'm an architect, and I do think this way. I'm very biased about it, but I think it's a good metaphor for you to understand how important the 75% is. So, great work is designed and built using sophisticated tools like value, shape, color, and painted surface. All these go together to create a skillfully designed puzzle that is a visual delight to the eye of the viewer. I liken this to a magic trick. Have you ever looked at a close-up magic trick? They call it a sleight of hand. You could look at that magic trick over and over again and not figure out how he did it. What I want to do with you in this video is I want to show you step by step how that trick's done. And I want you to do each step of the trick. So the strategies that I'm going to talk to you about are strategies for plein air painting in the field to gather information, strategies in the studio to design a better painting, and finally, strategies that are going to build your self-confidence, because that's one of the most important things in your painting process. Listen, this isn't rocket science. You can do this by building one step at a time. All right, finally, strategy number one. I want you to explore what other artists are doing. First of all, when you're in a workshop, I'm going to tell you a little secret. One of the best learning processes that you can go through is step away from your canvas during the class and go look at the work of others. You're going to learn so much from the people around you. Take a moment to look around at the work of others. You're going to learn a lot about what's working and what's not working. In your mind, become the teacher. What would you suggest that they do? Next, I want you to look at the work of others. For centuries, the great painters were looking at what others were doing. That's what the great Paris salons were all about. Now we live in a digital world where we have easy access to the work of other artists. There are fabulous museum shows and exhibitions all across the country. You can see the real thing in person. There are so many sources to look at other people's work, whether it's Facebook, Instagram, videos, digital magazines, etc. I found Pinterest is one of my best sources for images, as well as a great filing system. If you look at my Pinterest page, you're going to find my work and the work of others in various categories. I love this as a source and a file because I can have categories of ocean, of urban scenes, of bar scenes, and I get ideas for paintings. Facebook and Instagram are a great way to get images and also to follow your friends. I love to see what people are doing as they travel around the country, painting, participating in invitationals, and seeing how that work came out. It's a great way of keeping track. The next idea I want to share with you is subscribe to magazines. There's some great magazines out right now. Plein Air magazine, which I happen to be on the cover, and I'm very proud of it. Fine Art Connoisseur, Western Art Collector. These are all great magazines. And one thing I do is after about 3, 4, maybe 6 months, my wife will tell you 7 months, I like to take the great images out of the magazines and put them in these scrapbooks so that I can keep looking at other images. I just learned so much from the different perspectives that people use in painting their painting, their coloring, and their dark and light patterns. Here's my scrapbook that I have for landscape. I'll take this on the road with me, and after painting at night, I love to look through these images to see what other artists, and especially my friends, are doing. When I was working with my teacher, Leela Hardy, one of the fundamental questions that she asked me was, if you could paint like one artist, who would it be? Just like your father would ask you, what do you want to be when you grow up? I want you to have a design vision for your work. Here's another idea. Consider buying a painting by this artist. Hang it in your house and enjoy it. But also, you might want to consider copying it as an exercise. Keep it for yourself. Don't sell it. You're going to learn a lot through this process. I want you to have images and style in your mind that you're thinking about every day in your work as you look in the environment and as you paint your paintings. Have a style in mind. So let's talk for a moment about building self-confidence. It's really important in your work. Part of building self-confidence is feeling like you are a part of the artist community and that you belong. Then you feel confident to join local clubs, to show your work on social media, and even show your work at the local coffee shop. You might even want to enter your work in the Plein Air Salon or join us at the Plein Air Convention. Collecting paintings is a part of building your artistic vision. My wife and I collect art that we love to hang in our home. I hang it in my studio. I love to look at the magnificence of their work every day. We probably have over 100 paintings in our collection, and we've purchased them, we've traded my work for them, and we love the connection that we have with other artists. As an artist, you want to get better every day. So treat all these things that we've talked about as a part of your homework. I've thought a lot about how to get better. As a metaphor, let's look at how an athlete perfects their game. From a young age, athletes are schooled and practiced on the basics of the game. They probably spend more time practicing than playing. The best continue to perfect their game their entire career. Their strategy is straightforward. First of all, they practice the fundamentals. Number two, they break down their game and they work on their strengths and weaknesses. Number three, they watch others to understand their game. Number four, they get a good coach. Number five, they think like a rising star. They envision their future. Number six, they practice before their game with a warm-up, and they work on problems after the game. Athletes don't just play the game. They prepare, they perfect, and they envision their success. As an artist, the process is not much different. If you just really enjoy painting, that's fine, do it. But if you really want to refine your craft, let's get to work. So let's get into talking about painting. I want to talk to you about what to look for in the field. My studio work is based on the plein air studies that I've done in some of the most beautiful places in the world. I've found that plein air painting is about gathering information and developing ideas, period. When you're in the field, don't try to create a masterpiece. You can be overtaken by trying to get it right. Your goal is to get ideas about color relationship, shape patterns, and dark light relationships, rather than trying to get an accurate version of the scene. This is going to really free you up to get the information you need back in the studio. Now, let's talk about getting reference. One of the things that I really appreciate about my fellow artists is they're willing to go the extra mile to get that perfect view at that perfect time of the day. They're willing to climb to the top of the mountain or climb down the canyon to get that view of the stream running down the canyon. They're willing to get up early in the morning for that sunrise, that moment when the sun peaks above the horizon. They're willing to stay to the end of the day as the sun goes down and maybe shines its light through the waves. And maybe even stay up late to paint a nocturne. When I'm outside, I use 9x12 plein air panels made by Raymar. They're linen covered and they're what they call feather light. They're extra light and thin. They're perfect for outside. They allow my paint to just glide on so easily. Don't use cheap canvas panels. They'll fight you all the way. It's tough enough painting outside. So when you're outside, Look for interesting patterns of dark and light shapes. Look for distinct silhouettes. Decide what this study is about. Is it the sky? Is it the foreground? Is it the light and the dark? And finally, develop a design ideal for this painting. Don't just paint a scene. When you're outside plein air painting, try to paint it in under an hour or two. Don't labor over it and don't get hung up in the detail. Try using large brushes with lots of paint. Be more interested in the idea and capturing the subtleties of color. And I want to point out specifically color in the shadows. In the shadows, there is a lot of light reflected into those, and the temperature changes quite a bit. Whether it's the desert floor reflecting light into a shadow, or if it's the sky reflecting its bluer or cooler light into the shadow. Cameras are lousy at picking up color in the shadow. So when you're in the field, document it in your painting. Take lots of photos and videos for use in the studio for general information. To summarize, your goal when you're in the field is to make color notes, to look for patterns, and capture compositional ideas. So sit down and relax and look at your studies. Did you gather information? Did you develop some ideas? You might think about what do you like about them? And don't get upset if you didn't create a masterpiece. That wasn't your job. Okay, let's move on to composition. I believe composition does all the work and color gets all the credit. To understand this idea, let's consider some of the work of the great black and white photographers. They were able to create masterpieces using only composition, value, and shapes. A strong painting is usually based on a strong compositional diagram, and the diagram is really the backbone of the painting. It is this underlying structure that holds everything together. Without a basic structure or organizing idea, the painted image will feel weak and unorganized. The works of Shakespeare created iconic storylines that have been used for centuries. The classic storylines like good versus evil, with good winning out and living happily ever after, is certainly one of the most used. Think of Romeo and Juliet, their star-crossed lovers who ended tragically. You see these storylines over and over again in the movies. The same can be said about paintings. As you know, the great artist Edgar Payne identified several compositional diagrams that will provide a strong foundation for your painting. The magic lies in the ability to weave the compositional diagram into the composition so that it's strong but not obvious. I like to use one of 4 compositional diagrams. I use the S-curve, the steelyard, the cross, and the diagonal. So first, let's talk about the S-curve. I love the S-curve because you can find it in most landscapes. When you're out looking for a plein air subject matter, we always are drawn to a meandering path, a coastline that curves, or the edge of trees that have an S pattern. This is probably the biggest go-to pattern outdoors. Steelyard is the second diagram. It usually balances a large object with a small object in an offsetting balance created by the horizon. I like to push the smaller object off in the distance a bit, and that creates a path to direct the eye. Similar to steelyard, there's the cross. This is basically a high horizon or a low horizon with a vertical shape at the 1/3 point on the right or left-hand side of the canvas. The pattern is perfect when you want to emphasize something like a sailboat, a tree, or maybe even an interesting object. And now, moving on to the diagonal pattern. It's really great when you're trying to paint mountains or canyons. The pattern is dynamic, especially when you use several diagonals going in different directions. You'll work with these patterns so much that you're going to start seeing them wherever you look. Learn to look for patterns each day, whether you're in your neighborhood or driving across country. So I want you to get out some photographs and a sketchbook. And we're going to go through some of these photographs and try to look for compositional diagrams that we've talked about. When you're looking at your photograph, feel free to move things around, crop, and resize elements. This is a painting, not a historical photograph. You'd be amazed at how much the great artist took liberties with scale, color, placement, and detail. This is building the foundation for a great painting. Composition does all the work, and color gets all the credit. When you first have a photograph, consider cropping it to a place where it's close to the compositional diagram that you want to create. Let's look at this photograph. I think we've got a strong chance for the diagram called the cross. In the photograph, we've got the horizon in the middle, but we could crop it so that there's a low horizon, and we've got this beautiful sailboat in the foreground. If we set that about 1/3 from the right-hand side of the canvas, we're going to have a great composition. So here is the horizon. And let's just draw a sailboat. This doesn't have to be perfect. I'm just trying to diagram this out for you and create the sail right there. And we'll draw in, this happens to be in Newport Beach. And right, something like that, you've got a compositional diagram of the cross where you've got the horizon and the cross. Let's look at the next photograph. It's one of my favorite places in La Jolla in San Diego. Now we've got the larger photograph, but if we crop it, we can crop it either horizontally or vertically. And I want to look at both of them. If I lay out the frame of the sketch, I've got a high horizon, and then what I'm going to do is create an undulating coastline, kind of like this. That S pattern is going to work perfect for this photograph. Let's also look at it if we do it vertically. I think it'll work also. High horizon, S pattern, going like that. That's your basic compositional diagram that I want you to look at. So take out some photographs and do this for yourself. Find a compositional diagram that's going to work for the photograph. If you have to move things around, do it. Crop your photographs. Do whatever you need to do to create that strong compositional diagram. So let's move to horizon lines. I want to talk about the elements that are supportive of a compositional diagram. Your painting of a scene can have a very different look if you have a high horizon or a low horizon. Let's look at a couple sketches that were in Edgar Payne's book that illustrate this idea. If you have a low horizon, you may want to feature the clouds in your sketch. If you have a high horizon, you may be really trying to focus on the mountains in the foreground. Hence these two sketches. Okay, let's look at a series of sketches. First with a low horizon. The first sketch shows you a low horizon with sailboats, and it's that steelyard diagram. You've got the big sailboat in the foreground and the small sailboat in the distance. But also showing this is the big clouds in the background. So low horizon. The next low horizon shows cliffs in the foreground and the big sky in the background. And then finally, a low horizon showing you, let's say, a desert scene with big clouds that are featured in the sky. Next, let's look at the sketch of a high horizon. Now, I tried to do it similar to the sailboat with a low horizon, but what we're showing here is a reflection of the sailboat and the high horizon. And the same is true for those cliffs. The high horizon features the cliffs and the ocean in the foreground and really minimizes the clouds. And then finally, the high horizon, the last sketch I'm going to show you here, let's think of it as going down a canyon. Maybe there's a stream undulating down the middle, going to the ocean, but the ocean is minimized by the high horizon and some clouds showing in the distance. So next is the rule of thirds. I want to talk to you about two concepts of thirds that I find pretty interesting. First of all, let's break our canvas into three parts, horizontally and vertically. We'll do it in thirds, vertically and horizontally. Now, what I've found that is really fabulous is that you can build a strong foundation for your painting by putting an element, let's say it's a tree, on that third. Maybe we put the horizon on that third. Maybe we have the mountain down like this, and let's say that there is off in the distance a house. By putting these elements on the thirds, you create a foundation for a strong painting. Then, let's say we add the S pattern in, and we'll take it behind the tree and come like this. So we've got, say, a road coming down. Right there, you've got a great composition that I think would easily be a strong painting. Let's do another one. And we'll do our thirds like this, and let's do a low horizon this time. So if we do third like that, we put, let's say, a house on this side this time. I just try to keep this as simple as possible. And a tree. Maybe the tree is in front. Let's say it's in front of the building. And then you've got a big tree in the foreground here, like that, and a mountain like that. And then we'll draw our road coming in like this. And that's going to work as a great painting. I'm going to try this on you because I think it really works. I love telling jokes, and if I use the Johnny Carson rule of 3, it's usually successful. What this rule says is that you have to have the setup, the misdirection, and the surprise to really get people to laugh. I think the same thing is true with paintings. I think what you want to do is invite them into a painting, walk their eye around, and then have something that's really interesting, a focal point or a point of interest at the end of the trail. So this helps build the composition, it gives direction for the eye, and it gives a payoff at the end of the trail, the surprise or the focal point. Very important to building composition. In this photograph in Catalina, I want to illustrate my point. You walk into this photograph down this esplanade. You have the trees leading up to the casino at the end and the bright, light, white building at the end of the path. I think it follows this rule of thirds, the Johnny Carson rule of thirds. In my work, I always try to simplify my composition as much as possible. I like to try to break the composition up into 5 great shapes. So let's just try this on for size. I've got 5 shapes that are cut out of construction paper, and I want you to think of these shapes as solid like construction paper. First of all, I've got the ground. I've got the mountain. So that's pretty straightforward. Let's say I want to add a tree. I can put that tree there. I can put it over here, wherever I want to put it. Let's say we add another tree, but it's smaller and it's off in the distance. And let's say finally that I put a house. And you know, the house and the tree are interchangeable, especially if you put that road in. Now, whether it's 5 or 6 shapes, it doesn't really matter that much, but the idea is to look at your compositions in 5 shapes. Don't get hung up in the detail. We can break those down later. I'm going to show you how to do that by changing temperature, but I want to keep these shapes as solid as possible. All right, I've got a couple more examples for you, and again, kind of using the same sort of elements. We've got Number one, a house, a road, a mountain, a tree, and some clouds in the background. And my goal is to develop 4 different sketches that use these elements. The first sketch has a high horizon, a tree in the foreground. I've got a road running through, and I've kind of emphasized it with a fence. The second sketch shows a larger tree in the foreground, a smaller tree in the background, and the road. I've also added some shadows in there to kind of emphasize it. The third one, I've changed the scale of things a little bit. I've moved the building up. I've got the tree kind of running off the page. And it's a lower horizon with big clouds and a mountain in the background. And then finally, I've kind of minimized and made into a silhouette the tree and the shadow in the foreground. And this emphasizes more of the building in the background against the mountains with the big sky. So I'm using 5 shapes in 4 different ways to express a completely different feeling with each sketch. As you move through these sketches, think about what is the least amount of information you need to tell this story. And I want you to tell the story loud and clear. Keep it simple and straightforward. Don't get hung up in allegiance to the photograph. Create a good composition. I can't stress enough, do what it takes to make a great painting. If it takes moving things around or making things taller, do it. Just work solely on composition. Last 2 short little items here. Make sure you create a path of travel. I want you to consciously think about how you want the eye to travel through the painting and make it strong and clear. Secondly, create a focal point or a point of interest. And again, consciously try to connect that with the path of travel and give that little surprise or interesting shape at the end of the path. And you'll have a successful painting.
We talked about composition. Now let's get into values. A powerful painting has opposing forces of light and dark. But it's the relationship of these forces of light and dark that give accentuation and emphasis to a painting. But they can't be in balance with each other. Let's try the rule of thirds and create 2/3 dark and 1/3 light, or vice versa. Here's the way Edgar Payne diagrams it. The first diagram shows a castle on a hill. It's got the castle really as a silhouette with the sky as the light shape. The second one has the dark sky and light castle, so it really accentuates the castle. But interestingly enough, between the two, you get accentuation of that castle form in 2 completely different ways. The second 2 show mountains. This just shows a simple view of the mountain, let's say in the morning time. By afternoon, the sun has come up and is shining brightly on the mountain. The shadows are minimized and the light is maximized. In the 5th diagram, it's a bright day. We've got 2/3 light on the trees, in the sky, on the ground, and just some minimal shadows on the tree and on the ground. And then by the end of the day, we've got a little bit of light on the tree, and it's mostly dark, so it's 2/3 dark. So you can see in each of these diagrams, you can have the same scene, and just by lighting it differently, you can have a completely different effect. I have a strict rule for myself. I never paint in the middle of the day, and I don't really like painting in flat light. So, at noon, take a break. Go have lunch, take a nap, and avoid painting during that time. When the sun gets lower, use the shadows that are created by the lower angle of the sun to do the work in the painting. To understand this 1/3, 2/3 concept, take out your sketchbook
And then like we did before, get out some photographs and let's do some value sketches. I'm going to draw for you just the 2/3, 1/3 concept. And what I'm talking about, let's say a horizon line's right here. And we're just going to draw a simple tree right here. If we do 2/3 light and 1/3 dark, that would look a little bit like an idea like this. Okay? But let's say that I also wanted to consider the same scene as 1/3 light, 2/3 dark. I might maybe create a mountain here, and let's get the tree larger. And I do something like that. So I'm trying to conceive of the first scene as two alternatives. One is 2/3 light, 1/3 dark, and the second is 2/3 dark and 1/3 light. It just gives you some alternatives, especially when you're in the field, where you can consider, would it be better to go either direction? You're going to find that if you work with this idea enough, you're going to start seeing it in the environment. And you're going to see enough in the environment that you may be able to just adjust things like we talked about, the 1/3 and 2/3, where possibly, let's say you add a shadow in the foreground, or you create a dark silhouette of a tree. I've found a great trick in the field. I use my camera on my phone really to take photographs of a scene and get ideas. But also, I want to tell you about an app that I really like called See Value. You can take a photograph on your phone and you run that photograph through this app and it'll break it up into 2, 3, or 4 values so that you can see a scene better and understand it. I think it's really important when you're in the field. You can also do this on your computer in the studio to look at those value shapes and understand them so that you can design and adjust them to make a better painting. Let me show you 3 different photographs that I've run through this See Value app. The first one is a scene up in Utah where there's a strong dark and light pattern. The second slide, once I run it through the app, shows you the difference in the dark and light between the foreground and the background. The third slide, this is a shot in La Jolla, one of my favorite places to paint, shows you that light on the cliff in the distance and the dark in the foreground. Well, once you run it through the app, here's that dark, very dark, and it really offsets the light in the background. The third is the beach in La Jolla, looking over to Torrey Pines. It is a little trickier because it's showing what you think is 2/3 dark and 1/3 light, but actually when you run it through the app, it pretty much shows 1/3 dark and 2/3 light. And what you're going to notice is that the darker value that is actually in the light is pretty light. That's going to move us into the next strategy that I'm going to talk about, creating a painting in 3 values. Let's talk about limiting your values. Most paintings are expressed in 3 to 4 values. And we all know what the value scale is. I use the lightest as 1 and take it down to the darkest as 10. I really like to use values that are in about 7, which is here, and greater. It gives more light to the painting. So let's say if you're doing 2/3 light and 1/3 dark, I'll use 1 and let's say 3 or 4. And that actually showed it up in that last photograph that I showed you where we had 2/3 light and 1/3 dark. Let's say you're doing 2/3 dark and 1/3 light. I'll use 7 and say 6, or 8 and 6, and maybe 3. So I'm splitting those values. You might need one more value, let's say a highlight or a really dark spot, but try to keep that value minimized. Now, for the same composition, as we showed before, try to do an alternative. If you're naturally drawn to one, try the other just to mix it up a little bit. Now let's look at the same photograph that I ran through C-value, and you'll be able to see kind of what I'm talking about. The first photograph shows a predominance of dark. Very little detail. So it's got 2/3 dark, 1/3 light. The second photograph, I've shifted to, it's still 2/3 dark and 1/3 light, but there's 3 values in here. There's the darkest value, there's kind of a middle value of, let's say, a reflected surface from the building, but it's still in the dark value side. And then you've got the light value as the lightest. Now, in reality, there's surfaces that are in the sun, and anytime it's in the sun, it's really on the light value side of the spectrum. So the last one is 2/3 light and 1/3 dark, and you can see how that shows up in this photograph. So here's my mini sermon to you, and I really want to get it through to you. Design is everything. I'm always thinking about design as I'm moving through the preparation of a painting and the painting itself. I want to make sure that design is foremost in my mind. You almost can't lose if you have a strong composition and clearly defined value shapes. So we're getting to the end of the strategies, and I'm going to be demoing here pretty soon. But I've found that once you go through this whole process, you need to check yourself. And I've created a checklist that I put on my easel so that I can check my composition. We're naturally drawn to balance and repetition. And so you'll find yourself, whether it's a painting stroke or laying out a tree, you'll go boom, boom, boom like this, and you're going to get natural repetition. You want to check for this. What we really want is some imbalance, a lack of repetition, and a lack of order. So I've created a checklist that I like to hang on my easel so that I can check myself. Make sure there's no horizon or object in the center of the canvas. Is there anything repeating in its spacing? Avoid tangencies. If you're going to have something near a tangency, overlap a shape. Can any of the value shapes be combined? Is the layout true to the compositional diagram? Can anything be eliminated? Is there a path of travel for the eye? Is there a focal point? And finally, avoid equal shapes. In the initial part of the drawing, you're going to find that you avoid many mistakes in your composition that you don't have to fix later on in the painting. So let me show you several sketches and the way to avoid some of the items in the checklist. The first one shows your horizon in the middle of the canvas. Don't do that. Sometimes the trees will be in the middle of the canvas. Move them off to the side. The second diagram shows repetition. You do not want repetition in your composition. So change the height of those trees. Make one smaller and one lighter. You may want to change the spacing a little bit. In the third composition, and you see this a lot where, let's say a tree lines up perfectly with the mountainside that's in the distance. Try overlapping those trees over the mountain. It'll make a stronger composition. Now in this diagram, we've got two equal shapes. They're houses sitting on the horizon. You might try staggering those shapes. You know, it's the same scene, but just a different take on the scene. In the next diagram, I want to show you how to deal with a tangency. Let's say it's the sun or the moon coming up behind a mountainside. Overlap those shapes. Don't have a tangency. Here's another possible for overlapping. Let's say it's those trees. Put one overlapping the horizon and put one overlapping the hillside. The next one is, if you can combine some shapes, maybe it's not 3 trees set in a row, but you're combining those trees to make one larger, more interesting shape. And the last, at the end, make sure that you've got a good path of travel for the eye and a focal point. When I'm in the field, I take a lot of photographs. We've got, 80,000 photographs on our computer. What I found is if I take a general photograph, then I can get a lot of interesting paintings out of that photograph merely by cropping. So I'd like to show you a series of photographs to give you an idea of what you can do. Don't just take a picture of the scene. Let's create a cropped photograph that takes you miles down the road with your compositional idea. The first one is of the countryside. It shows a path, a nice meandering path winding down the hillside with a high horizon. But I can crop it to a low horizon where it emphasizes the sky and the silhouette of the trees more. I can increase the height of the horizon and make a longer path. So with just the same scene in the photograph, I've got 3 different compositional opportunities here. The next one is of a sailboat. So you see the horizon right in the middle of the photograph. Remember we talked about that's a no-no. So pick one or the other. The next one shows the high horizon with the sailboat about 1/3 from the left of the frame of the photograph. The next photograph is one you might take when you're out along the bay and you see this beautiful little boat sitting here. But you can make it a much better photograph by cropping in on it and maybe raising it so you've got more foreground. The next photograph is a scene in Marblehead, which is in the Massachusetts area. Again, an overall photograph, but I can make a vertical of it or I can make a horizontal of it. I can still capture the same scene with a different format. The next is an estuary in California, looking through the trees to this beautiful view in the back. But if I just go barely to the right, I can see a scene that has this diagonal composition with the estuary in the background. The next photograph shows you a series of houses in a bay. Beautiful place. And I can crop it in different ways. But I can also, in the last photograph of that group, I can darken the house in the foreground and create a predominance of light in the background. The last scene is in Rockport, Massachusetts. It's called Motif 1 because it's probably been painted more than any other place in at least the eastern United States. And I'm trying to show you here how I'm walking around this red building to see what is the best angle, what's the best composition that I can use to paint this building. And this is very similar to what I typically do. I walk all around and see where's the light best, what's the best composition. Do I want to put something in the foreground like this lift for lobster traps that will show scale? Or do I want to show boats? And how many boats do I want to show? So when I get back to the studio, I take my sketches and I take these photographs. And one of the efforts that I go through is to look at my photographs of a scene and crop photographs to see if I can get an interesting composition. In addition to cropping, I use Photoshop to add elements to a scene. So I like to take a scene like this one in Utah, and I want to add some scale figures to it. Using Photoshop, I can squash the picture, I can take elements and add them to the picture, I can increase the size of the photograph. I can do lots of things with Photoshop, and if you get a chance, I use Photoshop Elements. It's very simple to use, and it's very worthwhile in your design of your composition. So my last section is about drawing. I can't emphasize enough how much drawing is important to your effort, but it's not for the reason you think. And I'm going to talk about 3 different ideas here. First of all, draw to develop ideas. It's doodling. We all like to doodle, but make it productive doodling. I once went to the studio of Dan McCaw, and he showed me some books of his doodles. This guy sits around for an hour at night and doodles ideas for the next day. They're nothing specific, but he develops ideas that are compositions. My good buddy Jim Woodark also does the same thing. That's how he develops ideas. Draw to configure a scene. Designing. When you draw a scene, you really start to understand a scene. You understand where things are, where the horizon is, where trees should be or where they could be if you design them. So you're drawing to develop these ideas that we talked about earlier of 1/3 dark, 2/3 light, or vice versa. And finally, draw to understand what you're looking at. I took quite a few figure drawing classes, and I really found them helpful in landscape because in a figure drawing class, you have to really understand the relationship of things. You understand the gesture line, how thick things are, where a position of a head is, and it made me look carefully at the figure to be able to understand what was going on. I found the same thing to be true in drawing landscape. So now I want to show you how I used all of these fundamentals, compositional diagrams, and exercises to create a final painting. So I've chosen a scene in La Jolla. It's one of my favorite places to paint. It's kind of out away from the crowd, and it's a beautiful view of La Jolla Cove. And what I did was I created two different alternatives like we talked about before. Okay, the first sketch shows you low horizon, so I'm featuring some clouds here. I've got the silhouette of the bluff in the foreground and the lighted bluff in the back. And I've got this S diagram of the foam in the water. In the second one, I've done a high horizon right up here. I've still got that bluff in the foreground, in shadow and in silhouette. But I've also got the highlighted bluff in the background, which is where my point of interest is. And here, not quite as obvious, is the foam in the water. Let's decide what this painting is about. What do I want to emphasize? First, I'm going to show you a series of photographs where I walked around to decide what to paint. The scene has a strong silhouette with the landform. The sunlight is coming from the upper left, and the landform in the distance is highlighted by the sun. Here's a decision that you can make freely. Do you want to light the cliff in the foreground or put it in shadow? I'm going to choose to put it in shadow. The pattern of the wave shapes in the foam on the water lead the eye nicely through the painting. Finally, notice the sky. A subtle blend of a very muted yellow is transitioning to kind of a violet blue. So next, which of the diagrams do you think is going to fit best with this? And I'm going to go to my sketchbook and start drawing this for you. I think the compositional diagram that's going to work best for this painting is the S-curve. It's probably something like this, where we're going to take the S and we're going to wrap it around like that. Secondly, do we want to do a high horizon or a low horizon? I showed you two possibilities in my sketches. Let's explore both of them. So if we have a high horizon, and let's say that we're going to start putting our cliff in. I'm going to go to my 1/3, 2/3 here. I'm going to put the first cliff in like this, and I'm going to put the second cliff in, let's say about here. And I have my high horizon, and here's that S-curve coming through here. That feels pretty good. But I do want to look at an alternative. What if I have a low horizon? I'm going to put my cliff in like that. I'm going to put the second cliff in like that. and that S curve coming in like that. So I've got two different options here. One is about the ocean and the foam running through it. The second is probably more about the sky. I could do some big clouds in here. I could do whatever. I could even emphasize the height of these cliffs so it's a little bit more dramatic. But I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to pick this one for my painting. So the next thing we talked about was creating 5 great shapes, and I want to do that in this composition. And we'll see if we can do it in those 5 shapes. We're going to start out with the first cliff, which we decided we're going to go like that. That's number 1. We've got number 2 back here with a bluff that's going to be highlighted with the light. We have the shape of the water here, so that's 3. We've got 1, 2, 3. And we've got the foam running through it, which is 4, and we've got the sky. So that's 4. And we've been able to simplify this composition down into 5 great shapes. All right, next thing we want to do is look at thirds. So let's look at the 2 diagrams, and we're going to swap the darks and the lights and see how this works. So we take the first alternative, and I'm going to do 2/3 light and 1/3 dark. We'll do the cliff dark, and we're going to do the water dark, and I'm going to just hatch that so that you get the idea of the dark. So we've got 2/3 dark, and granted, this is the darkest dark, and this is probably a value of about 6. And then the light of the sky, the cliff, and the foam. Now, the other possibility is we're going to make a dark sky. And we'll take the dark sky. That's going to emphasize the lightness of the cliff here. And we're going to do that foam like that. And keep the ocean, the water area, fairly light. But maybe it is just slightly darker than the foam. I think I'm going to choose this one. I think it's going to have more light and feel more inviting. Finally, let's go through the checklist of just the basic layout. So I've got my thirds, and I'm going to put my cliff in here over to my third, something like that. And I'm going to have a high horizon. So that takes care of the first issue. Is there anything in the middle? And no, there's not going to be anything in the middle. Secondly, I want to make sure there's no tangencies. So I want to make sure that the cliff is overlapping the horizon. I want to make sure that this cliff, which is the silhouette, is not touching anything, and it's not. It actually is running off the canvas, which is going to be great. I've got this cliff. We'll make it maybe a little bit higher, so that's a little clearer. I don't want this line running into, say, this line, okay? So it's going to go like that. This is not running into either this or this. These are both running off the page, so they're going to be strong. Next, we're going to make sure that the value shapes that can be combined are combined. I think all these are pretty much separate, and they're pretty much interesting shapes. We'll do a few things like there's going to be some trees up on top here, so that'll make that shape a little more interesting. I'll probably fool around with the foam a bit. Maybe I'll add some rocks out in here. But again, I'm trying to make sure nothing is repeating. Is the composition diagram true to the one we started out with, the S? I think this is going to work. This is kind of an S pattern also, so it's really fairly strong. We haven't gotten away from that S pattern. Can anything be eliminated? I don't think so. We've got 5 great shapes here. I think this is going to work just fine. Is there a path of travel for the eye? Yeah, there is. This path of travel runs through here, also runs through here. And I think when I do the painting, what I might do is create a really great wave here, splashing on some rocks that are coming out this way, and give you something at the end of the path of travel for the eye. Is there a focal point? Yeah, I think we're going to try to get that as the focal point there. And I think that's really the checklist. I think we're going to be okay with this diagram. Once I decide on this layout, I can lay this out on my canvas with a burnt umber wash. That all being said, let's start painting. All right, we're going to get into playing the game. I've got a couple things I want to do first, but we're going to paint the painting. First of all, I'd like to show you just some thoughts about the type of plein air sketches that I do when I'm out in the field. Remember, I said it's not a masterpiece. I want you to gather information. So, here's a shot that I did because it was very dark and I wanted to kind of understand what the scene was about. And really, it had strong lights here. This was a sycamore tree and it was lighting those branches. It was very interesting, but what was most important was just this design here. But it's not a masterpiece. I'm not going to hang this on the wall. Here's another idea. In fact, taking that 9 by 12 and dividing it into 2. Just trying to get an idea about design. Here's another approach. I tried to do something that was pretty monochromatic to understand this was a water course running through here and a sycamore tree hanging over. And I wanted to understand, could this be a good painting? A lot of times when I'm out plein air painting, I develop an idea and I realize I don't like it, so I'll treat it another way. But this actually worked pretty well, and so I did another version of the same idea with color. And a trick that I use is I'll take a photograph of this with my phone and I'll desaturate it so I take all the color out of it and I can see it in black and white and see if I was able to achieve basically what this achieves. And if it's not quite right, I'll darken down that shape. So plein air sketches are tools. They're for gathering information and developing ideas. The next thing I'd like to do is let's just kind of look at this is the plein air sketch of the bigger painting that we're going to do. It has all the things worked out design-wise and compositionally that I want to use. I've developed my design, my diagram, my compositional diagram. I've looked at values, I've looked at shapes, I've looked at the horizon. I've done all the things that I want to do now. Now I'm going to go back and develop the bigger painting on the canvas. I'm going to do a burnt umber layout, or also known as just a kind of a mid-tone layout. I try to keep it very thin. I am going to tone the canvas first. I really have come to like that more. And then I'm going to do the layout. To do that, I'm going to put some white, some titanium white on my palette. I'm going to use Signal Flag Red, which is made by Hughes. And actually, Gamblin makes this, but Deborah Hughes was the person who designed the colors. I really like those colors. I'll talk about them a little bit more in the future. And then I've got this Anchor Green, which is kind of a muted green. And I'm going to mix those together also to get kind of a tone on here. And I want to keep it really thin, so I'm going to get it on there. Maybe I'll do a little more yellow. I want it to brighten up just a little bit here. And you know, painting is not a straight arrow direction. You move back and forth, you test things out, you make sure that you keep looking at it, stepping back. I like to step back so that I can judge, am I going in the right direction? And with every step of the way, you want to be moving towards, that's better, towards a great painting. So I try to get this spread out as much as I can around. I don't need to cover it perfectly because I'm going to come back with a blue towel and spread that all around, and it wipes the excess off also. What I like about this is it warms the painting up almost immediately. It kind of creates that undertone to the painting, as well as it sets up pretty quickly. And it allows me to to lay that paint on so that it grabs it really nicely. Okay, now, I love these blue shop towels, work towels that you can get at the local market, whether it's Ace Hardware or Home Depot. They're not expensive. They come in groups of 6. Okay, so I've gotten the white out of it, and I think that works pretty well. The next thing I want to do is mix kind of a neutral color. And any time you add green and red together, and then maybe a little bit of white, you're going to get kind of a neutral gray. Let's just see how that works. Yeah, that's going to be perfect. Okay, good. And I use Gamsol. I don't really use mediums. I use a little bit of Gamsol once I get going as my medium, but I just like to keep it as simple as possible. So, first of all, we're going to create our thirds that we talked about earlier. And right about there and there. They don't have to be perfect, but it's to keep this in mind, okay? I have my photograph over here that I'm looking at. I've got my sketches. And I'm going to lay this large cliff in. And I'm just going to get an idea. I don't want to fully commit to it yet. Maybe we'll do a little bit bigger, like this. And just try to get some interesting shape ideas going on. All right. Then I'm going to put this cliff right about here. Just like the sketch that I was talking about earlier. And we've got some trees up in here. There's this building, kind of is like that. It's a piece of land kind of sticking out, and what that's going to be is we're going to put the focal point right there so that you can, we're going to get something going on here like a crashing wave. And then, remember we talked about a high horizon. I'm going to put the horizon right there. So we've got a good basic composition. These are at the thirds, that's at the third, and we've got this big wide open space to have that S diagram of the foam coming through. If I have, let's say, I'm going to put kind of a wave right here and the horizon behind it. And although it doesn't show it perfectly on the photograph, I'm still going to create that foam coming in there. And remember how we talked about overlapping shapes? I want to take that running behind this so that you get this foam. Interesting idea of the foam. And again, it kind of runs off. And you know, that's how foam goes when it's in the ocean. It kind of works its way around. It floats every which way. But that kind of gives me an idea of what I want to end up with here. Okay, that's the outline. Now I step back. Try to step back every few minutes because you get a whole different view. Also, I'll tell you, in my studio, off behind me, I have a big mirror on a stand so that I can easily look in the mirror, look back at the painting. I can look in the mirror if I have my TV monitor showing the image. I can see in the mirror the TV image and the photograph and the sketch that I've done and see if I'm getting it right. There's something about getting a different point of view that's so important. If you just continue to look yourself at your painting, your mind adds all kinds of things into it. But if you get a glimpse of it, let's say you went for a break and the first view that you have when you come back is probably one of the most honest views. Another way to get it is to walk away and look back quickly. But you want to get a glimpse so you get a pure view where your mind hasn't added a lot of detail to it. Now, the next thing, and remember we talked about using large brushes. I'm going to get this a little more mixed up. It's a value that's probably about a number 7. And I'm going to lay it on. Remember we decided that we're going to kind of keep this dark. In the foreground. And when I'm scrubbing, I try to go on the side of my brush. I'll talk about brushes a little bit later on. And I'll change the temperature a little bit. I'll add a little color in there just to get something going on that's interesting. But let me stress, let's keep it nice and thin. That way you can make changes easily just by merely wiping it off, and I'll show you how I do that. This is going to be everything that you translated through compositions, your drawing, your photograph, cropping, all of that. This is where the rubber meets the road. And so you want to get this as accurate as possible so that you feel really comfortable about it when you get to the color stage of this. This should read almost as a finished painting when I'm done with the burnt umber layout, that it's got the values exactly the way I want it. The shapes are exactly the way I want it. And I don't have any tangencies. I've overlapped things. I've done everything that we talked about in the fundamentals early in the video. And I'll tell you, I've got a friend of mine who's a great artist who spends a whole day doing this. He lays it out, he stands back, thinks about it for a while. It's almost annoying how much time he spends. But this guy is a great painter, and so I think it's really important, per his direction, to think a lot about these angles of the shapes of shadows. See if that works, because you know, if you get it right, this thing's going to paint itself. It makes it so much easier. We've got this cliff, and cliff goes like this. Shadows go like that. And you know, here's an interesting decision point that I'm going to make. I want this to jump out and jump off the page. So even though in the photograph the shadow goes over here, I think I'm going to cut this shadow right here so that the light is really accentuating the silhouette of this cliff. I'm going to create a 90-degree right there. So I'm going to thinly add in that shadow, and I might even add a little bit of lightness to this so that it starts stepping back a little bit. Okay. See how that drops back from here, and I can make this come a little bit forward. By taking the edge, putting an outline on it right now to decide what outline do I want for this. What's the best shape? Okay, for now, that's looking pretty decent. I'm going to bring this down a little bit so that it's moving towards you. And I notice that there's a few rocks out here, and actually that rock pops out there, makes it more interesting. And out in here, there are some rocks. And I heard someone say one time, the way to paint rocks is to make them look like you really get hurt when you fall on them. So make them short or sharp, make them different shapes, and we're going to carve those shapes as we go through this. Keep them thin, okay? And I'm going to add a little bit more to this. When you paint this thin, it really gets sticky, and so when you lay something on later, it holds even better. Go like that. And I'm going to tell you, there are times that I'm going to make mistakes in this, as we all do. But that's how I'm going to teach you, is showing how I fix my mistakes. You know, we talked earlier about golf, and I learned something about golfers that I thought was really fascinating. The difference between the top golfers on the PGA circuit and the bottom golfers is about 5 to 6 points in their average score. The really good golfers know how to get out of trouble better than the guys who aren't as good. They all hit pretty well down the fairway. They can all pretty much make their putts, but it's when they hit behind a tree and they can get out of trouble that it shaves off 2 or 3 or 4 strokes on their overall score. So I'm telling you, I'm going to make some mistakes along the way, and I'm going to show you how to get out of them. Okay, that's feeling better. There's a few little rocks over here that I want to emphasize, but here it's just the bottom of that cliff. So we've got kind of some shapes that are a little ragged over here and a nice smooth edge that will hit this larger shape coming in. All right, now, these trees up here, and I'll lighten those down a little bit. And I actually know this scene pretty well, so I know that there is light underneath those trees. They're canopy trees with a little bit longer trunks, and so there is some light underneath there. And it kind of goes down like that. And we'll end this here, and maybe actually put some things here. Then there's a staircase that goes up here. And we'll just kind of indicate that because it is a darker value and it has something to do with the design. And eventually we're going to take that up there. But it's light. All right. Then I want to do start getting a color of this water in here. Now you may wonder why I'm not doing this in blue. I really want you to see the burnt umber layout or the medium value layout and judge whether those values are working. And we can change temperature really easy. It's harder to change the value. I'm going to bring this in like this. You know how we talked before about the black and white photographers? Well, this is kind of it. This may be even older with the sepia tone photographers. They had those rich colors of those sepia tones. And they're wonderful to look at. I even take some of my black and white photographs and run them through the sepia tone filter just because it gives such a rich character to it. So that's what I'm trying to do here is create basically a value sketch that's a sepia tone. Okay, and I've got the rocks up here like this, and then finally we're going to take this ocean. There's just a little bit of ocean out there. It's going to be a little bit of blue. And that's going to be my ocean behind a dark wave, some breaking foam, and then a crashing wave up here. And I want to give a little bit more definition to that. Okay, let me step back now. And that's feeling pretty good. Now let's try, come through and wipe out some of these overages. I take this behind here, makes it more interesting when the shape engages. Take this out like that. And I can add a lot of color to this dark shape in the foreground with changing the temperature. I'm going to talk to you about that as we go through. All right, so I've got an overall approach to this. Now I'm going to go back in and try to tighten these up a little bit. Let's see. Okay. Comes down like that. And then when this hits the water, it kind of reflects. You kind of want to lose the edge and strengthen the edge at various points along the way as we come in here. And again, I'm thinking about design. I've got this photograph of the place that I'm painting, but at some point I kind of let that go and paint the design. Everything that I'm adding to this is to make a better design. Obviously, I want to have a likeness to the design, to the actual scene, but I'm making a painting. No one's going to compare this with a photograph of the scene. And I'll tell you, there's many times I go back and I thought the scene was better in person than I've now imagined it in my mind. And this is one of those examples. Now, this cliff comes down here and down like that. And I want to start kind of cutting this up so that I recognize that there's different faces. So in this section of the photograph, it's actually got more light on it. And if you notice my brushwork, what I'm trying to do is put big, broad strokes that are really shapes on here. And they come down like this. There's some where the light's not getting in as much, and some where it is coming in. But you're just trying to make a design of that. That'll be interesting to look at. Up front here, I want to recognize that there's these flat faces down here. There's these edges like that. And kind of an edge. And what you don't want to, you want to make sure that you don't get this equal with that. So I've got to pull this back a little bit. And then you get worried about 1, 2, 3. So be careful in how you size these different shapes. This comes up like that. There's several dark shapes kind of underneath this little protrusion. And along the way, there are some shapes like that. This is all about shapes. You're creating shapes in different values, and all those shapes go together to create a powerful painting. Don't think of it as lines. These are big shapes, and you want to keep these holding together. So within the shape, we're going to be changing the temperature a little bit in various places because light kind of reflects into it and hits off of it. And so it will actually not be one solid color of the same temperature. It's going to have lots of temperatures to it and lots of visual interest because it's right up front in your face, and you need to be able to express that in the painting. And this is going to come up. This is like a flat area that comes down like this on the cliff, and then it goes vertically like this.
Hey, would you like to win a beautiful painting worth almost $3,000? We've got a beautiful Joe McGurl plein air study that he's done of the sunset in Maine. It's gorgeous. If you want to have an opportunity to win it, go to paintinggiveaway.com. Just put in your email. That's all you've got to do, and you only need to enter once. We'll be giving away the prize at the end of May. Go to paintinggiveaway.com.
Artist Mark Fehlman knows that 75% of his time is spent on planning, and only 25% is spent on actually painting. Now, he's going to show you how better planning leads to better paintings as he demonstrates his proven theory and design strategies for powerful paintings. If you're willing to do a bit more work up front, you'll find yourself progressing through your paintings with more confidence that the end result will be just as you envision. And Mark is the perfect coach to show you how to work efficiently and effectively so the planning phase becomes enjoyable for you.
In this video, I want to share with you powerful strategies that are going to make your paintings dramatically better. To get the benefits of these strategies, you have to employ them in practically every step of your design and painting process.
From there, Mark puts it all into action. Follow along and see how his solid plan supports each phase as he demonstrates a beautiful seaside painting done from a plein air sketch, photo reference, value, and composition sketches.
Design is everything. I'm always thinking about design as I'm moving through the preparation of a painting and the painting itself. I want to make sure that design is foremost in my mind.
Mark will show you from start to finish how to visually communicate a place so full of beauty that you felt the call to paint it.
We talked about what an athlete does to get better. He's got to work on things every day. It may not be the same thing, but maybe one day it's brush strokes. Another day it's working on composition diagrams. Another day it's looking at alternatives for dark and light shapes and how those work together. These are the fundamentals that are going to advance you in your career and in your drive to be a better painter.
Available on DVD or digital to view on your computer, tablet, or smartphone. Design Strategies for Powerful Paintings with Mark Fehlman is available right now.
Well, that was Design Strategies for Powerful Paintings with Mark Fehlman. You can learn more about that at lilyartvideo.com. Now let's learn more about Mark and why he's such a nice guy and a little bit of an interview. Hi, I'm Eric Rhodes, publisher of Fine Art Connoisseur and Plein Air magazines. Today I've got a great guest, artist Mark Fehlman. Mark, welcome.
Thank you very much for having me here.
I'm really excited about this because you and I live on different coasts. Well, I live in the middle, you live on the coast. Yep. And we don't get an opportunity to sit and talk very much. We obviously know each other. We've been to events together. We see you everywhere. But, you know, those things are busy. So it's kind of nice to be able to just sit and get to know you a little bit.
I appreciate that. I've spent lots of time at the plein air conventions, and we get a chance to talk every so often. I get to hear you more than you hear me.
Well, and as you know, it's pretty busy.
Yeah, it is. It's great, though. It's been a great opportunity to participate in all that in the world.
So when we were at dinner the other night, you were talking about what that event does for you.
Well, I always think it's like summer camp for me. You know, all my good friends are there. I get to really interact with some of my painting heroes that I've had for a long time, that I respect their work so much. And yet you meet them on a personal basis and get to know what they're doing. You talk about where you've been and where you can go painting with them. And it's a fabulous opportunity to be a part of your painter nation.
Painter Nation. Mm-hmm. That's a great term. I'm going to steal that. Welcome to the Painter Nation. So, thanks for that. I appreciate it. To me, it's kind of like Thanksgiving. You know, except it's family members you want to be around.
Right.
right?
Absolutely.
You know how that goes.
Yep. And we're all exhausted when we're done because we've had so much fun and we've tried so hard to squeeze every little bit out of the time that we're there.
Well, as you know, we get up really early in the morning for marketing, and some of us stay up till really early in the morning.
Yep.
So yeah, you don't get a lot of sleep.
Well, I remember the first year when you were doing your marketing boot camp, you know, I would get up every morning and listen to you, and I said, okay, I'm going to do what he says. And it's worked out well for me.
Okay, tell me the truth.
And it's all true.
Okay.
It's all true.
All right. So Mark, I want to kind of do a rewind here because you have had a fascinating life and a fascinating career before this whole second career of being an artist happened. So, but first let's go back to childhood. Mm-hmm. Do you recall any notice of art or influences of art back when you were a kid?
Absolutely. My mother fancied herself as an amateur artist, and she introduced me to all kinds of things. You know, I grew up in the 60s and 70s when you were doing sand candles and macrame and silk screening and all these great things, and she and I did a lot of it. I was really the child that excelled with her in art. It was not drawing, and it really wasn't painting, but it was making things and building things. And for me, that kind of led into architecture, which was my first career. And I wanted to be an architect since I was about 9 years old. But I always had, all through high school, I had this art background going on. And I actually had a career, believe it or not, in sculptural weaving, which is totally different.
What is sculptural weaving?
Well, you know, it kind of came around when the macrame movement was going on.
Right.
But I was spinning wool and dyeing it with natural dyes and weaving it into sculpture that was woven.
Really?
And I had shows in Laguna Beach and San Francisco and places like that. And then I went off to architecture school, and there was no time for any of that.
Right.
So I left that behind and became an architect.
You know, I should just say that similar upbringings, not that this is about me, but when I was a kid, my mom was an artist. I wanted to do art, but I also decided I was going to become an architect. But the key difference is that you did it and I didn't.
Yes.
And the reason I didn't at the time, I was intimidated by what I had heard about the process, because architecture school is really, really hard.
Yeah.
What was that like?
You know, I was probably a little naive going into it, but I had an architect mentor when I was young. Mm-hmm. And I always wanted to grow up to be like him. He was the perfect image of what I wanted to be. And so he said, go to this school, Cal Poly San Luis Obispo, and I went. I didn't ask any question, and no one else did of me. And I'll tell you, it was very tough. You work extremely hard. You work long hours because there's no answer in design especially. You don't solve a problem. You come up with an answer, and then there's 3 more answers that you need to come up with. And so I found that just the mental struggle of coming up with something that you're proud of, that you can present to your professor, was difficult. The math part, you get through, you know, and that's what everybody says. I would be an architect if it weren't for the math. Well, I just figured out how to get through it.
Yeah, so that kind of comes down to, if you get your math wrong, the building falls apart kind of a thing?
No, you actually hire a structural engineer to do the work. Once you're through those math classes, you never use it again. So
now, what about drawing? Because I have a friend who just put his daughter in architecture school, and she has 2 or 3 hours a day of drawing in her first year.
Right. Well, you know, for me especially as a designer, you draw to develop ideas the same way you do in painting. And so we did a lot of drawing. We took classes in perspective and shading and shadowing and a lot of things for buildings that we learn in, say, figure class. Now, I didn't have as much true art because Cal Poly is more of a polytechnic, technical school, but art was a part of it.
You know, I wonder, you know, today in the architecture schools, I thought they'd only be doing drawing on iPads and Macs and things like that.
Yeah.
But, and when I asked about that, they said, well, the reason we want these people to draw is because they have to meet with a client, they have to be able to sit down and render out a drawing and say, is this what you want, this is what you have in mind?
Right.
Did you find yourself doing things like that?
Absolutely. You know, the whole process of convincing a client that this design is right for them, but also getting good input from them, because I always believed that I couldn't come up with the perfect solution on my own. I needed input from the community as well as the client, and I would bring it all together to inform the design. And so not only do you have to draw ideas for the client, let's say they have a concept and you can change your design on the fly, but when you're working with a community, you can do the same.
Yeah. So in what ways, and I want to ask you a couple more architecture questions, but in what ways did architecture school and or a career in architecture prepare you for becoming a full-time artist?
Well, first of all, let me say that I made enough money in school working as a waiter to be able to pay for school. And I always thought that everything I learned as a waiter taught me how to be a good architect, because you had to multitask and you had to work with different parties all at the same time. You had to keep people satisfied, all those sorts of things. And so the things that I learned in architecture about that you not only have to do great design, but you have to market, you have to keep employees happy, you know, you have to get out and get new ideas for things. You have to be influenced by the world. You have to communicate with people, say in a community setting. So all those things that I learned in architecture are directly applied to painting. And the part of painting that we don't always like, which is the marketing and the selling.
Yeah. Now, go back to your career as an architect. What kinds of things were you designing? Did you start out doing one thing and end up doing another?
Well, you know, most architects start out with their first job. It's either your uncle's house or your uncle's addition or your parents' house. But I started out doing single-family homes and eventually worked into health clubs, big health clubs around the country. We did multifamily housing. We did master planned community, 2 or 3 big ones. And then I ended up, the last 10 years of my career, I did big movie theaters. And the movie theaters, I got to design the carpet, the wallpaper, the signage. I did everything.
So you were also playing the role of an interior decorator.
That's right.
And why would that be different? Were you trying to, you were trying to help people get kind of into an escape mentality? I've been to some of the movie theaters you've designed. I know of one in particular, and that theater kind of took you back to 1930. It was kind of an Art Deco thing, if I remember.
Right,
Is
yeah.
that why they had you do all of that? Because typically wouldn't the architect do, like, you do the building and then they hire an interior designer?
Well, that's the interesting thing. You know, many architects, what they do is they'll do the shell, say an office building, and tenants will come in and do their own thing with the interiors. This is much like doing a home where you get to do all of it. The landscape, I mean, the interiors, the kitchen, you pick the fixtures. And that's why I gravitated towards doing these theaters, because I got to really make a lot of decisions about the exterior as well as the interior. So when I first started working for this company had movie theaters that were in these domes. They're iconic domes, which you've probably seen.
Yeah,
up there.
I've been in, yeah.
And I proposed the idea that we try to go back to the old movie theaters of Hollywood in the early years that were glamorous and glitzy, and they attracted people and made it a special occasion. And it was during the time when movie theaters were kind of starting to die out, cable TV was coming in, and everybody thought that's the end of the movie theater. And then they invented stadium seating and big wide screens and great sound. And so just adding on to that, we tried to make the movie theaters a big experience to go to.
I remember that. The theater I remember was in the town I was living in California, in Pleasant Hill. And the sign had this art, this Art Deco 1930s feel and this
Right.
flashing neon, and it really did kind of transport you to a different place. So congratulations on that.
Thank you.
So I think some of the artists that we both know give you the whole package, right? So I have a painting in my home, which was painted by David LaFell, but he also made the frame. And I asked him, well, why did you make the frame? He says, because I couldn't find a frame that ever fit the look that I needed for my painting. So that, you were kind of doing the whole package.
I was.
Now, how do you deal with that now as an artist? Do you make your own frames? Do you finish your own frames? Do you have one that you've found that is kind of a look, or do you do it individually with each painting? What's that look like?
Well, I admire people like Carl Dempwolf, who makes their own frames. I think Eric Merrill does the same. And I can't imagine how they find the time to do it.
Yeah.
It takes a tremendous amount of time to do that. So I collect frames. And we've got an attic in our house where I can buy frames and set them up there and wait for the right situation. And I think as time has gone on, I've tried to up the quality of the frames, the variety, and I've got a few frames just waiting for the right painting. So I've got probably 100 frames in my upstairs, and when the painting comes along, I try to match it with the right frame.
Framing is an interesting topic, and we've kind of veered way off, but let's deal with it since we're talking about it. Frames make a huge difference for paintings and for marketing of paintings. I kind of equate it to, the car that surrounds you when you're sitting in the window. It kind of sets a tone for, what your lifestyle is like or what you're like. What's your thought process on framing? A lot of people will go for inexpensive frames. Some of them look nice, some of them look cheap. But I have found that if you put a great looking frame, no matter if it's cheap or expensive, it changes the nature of how the painting looks, but also how people respond to it. Do you have a particular philosophy about that?
Well, it really varies based on the situation. Like if I am framing a painting for the Gold Medal Club, California Art Club, I'm going to put the best frame I can get, and I will call the frame maker and have them make a specific frame for me for that. Because I want to sell it to a collector who wants top quality. There's other situations where people, they don't want to pay for the expensive frame, so I find frames that are, I wouldn't say cheap by any means, but they're less costly, and they go well with that situation.
So a situation like that might be, let's say, a plein air show or something where people are kind of buying almost off the easel,
Yeah.
versus a show where people are going to write big checks
Correct.
from big collectors.
Right.
So we kind of need to transition backwards again to you're in this architecture thing, and all of a sudden you started painting. What happened there? How did that come about?
We had a small office downtown in San Diego, and about 2 doors down was this amazing plein air gallery. It was like God set it there for me to take a look at, And I would go down at lunch and just look at these paintings, and I just couldn't believe how beautiful they were. And when they had openings, I got to meet some of the artists, and I found out that the gallery owner also taught lessons in the back. And so my wonderful wife allowed me to have some Saturday time to go take these lessons. So once I started taking the lessons, I'd come home and paint at home, in the kitchen at night. I started taking some lessons at Scottsdale Art School, and it just sucked me right in. And I fell in love with the whole idea of painting, and I, believe it or not, I went to my partner and asked, would you buy my half of the business? And he said, how soon? And I said, as soon as possible, because I felt that I was at the later years of my life, and if I was going to have a second career, I needed to get to work. And so 15 years later, here I am.
So did you go to him after you had developed enough confidence that you felt like you were a good enough painter to make it on your own, or you just said, I'm just going for it?
I said, I'm just going for it.
Wow, that took a lot of guts.
It really did.
I would imagine that was a tough conversation at home.
You know, Ann's always been supportive of what I want to do, and that's not the first time I've asked her a question like that.
You want to tell me?
Nor the last.
Oh, well, let's find out. We have to probe this now. Inquiring minds want to know. Based on what you went through in learning to paint, and now knowing what you know, what would you do differently in teaching someone else how to paint?
I would start a little bit more with the classic atelier method.
What's that mean? A lot of people don't know what that means.
Well, I'm gonna tell you. It's learning the basics of composition, of shape and shadow, and value. All those things. I kind of learned how to paint a scene, but I didn't learn how to build a painting. And I think that that's what's so important with learning how to paint. What are the characteristics and the fundamentals of building a painting? Whether it's some of the classic compositions that Edgar Payne talked about, or 2/3, 1/3 in the value composition. There's a lot of kind of very powerful basic fundamentals that you can learn that I wasn't really taught. And I would try to teach someone about those fundamentals, which are very learnable. It has nothing to do with talent. They're learnable. You can pass them on to others.
I think that's really interesting because I think the process that most people go through when they're learning to paint, they find an art teacher somewhere, and the art teacher says, bring in a picture you'd like to copy.
And paint it.
And paint it.
Right.
And then the art instructor will go through the process of creating the painting, but you're not necessarily getting those fundamentals. You might pick them up over time, which is probably what you did and what I did.
Right.
But to sit down first and say, okay, here are the steps that we need to go through, and if you get these steps right, then we'll craft a painting, makes a lot of sense. But there's the Mary had a little lamb problem. And what I mean by that is, I think that a lot of people get discouraged very early when they're learning anything. We're learning to paint, learning to play music. And I found when I was learning to play the piano that the teacher made me play the scales and all that nonsense, and I hated that. But once the teacher said, okay, here's how to play Mary Had a Little Lamb, or they make you feel like you're accomplishing something. So do you give this a mixture of, here's how to do values, now let's work on a painting, or is it do all this stuff first and then work on a painting? If you were teaching a weekly class, for instance, how would you do it?
Well, we're plein air painters, right? And even in the studio, our work is based on plein air. And it's really difficult in the field to create a painting. So when I teach a class, what I teach is, let's take color out of the equation. And let's just paint a scene in like a burnt umber and white.
Brown and white or black and white?
Yeah, black and white. Let's pick 3 values and paint this scene. Okay, now once you get that done, I give them 45 minutes to do it. all right, let's paint the same scene, but let's change up the values. So I'm not asking them to create a masterpiece that they can come home and show their family and show off. I'm teaching them how to develop basic skills to see a scene and be able to understand what the dark and light patterns are that are in there. And that takes all the pressure off someone trying to paint a scene.
I think that, to add to that, I think that what would be important, and maybe you do this, is if someone would have sat me down and said, okay, here's the process we're going to go through.
Right.
We're going to start here, and here's why, and here's how to impact you, and then we're going to do this, and you're going to get to do a little black and white painting here, and then we're going to do this, and you're going to get to do this here. If someone would kind of help me understand the process, because I got so frustrated that I was ready to quit. I actually walked out of the class one time because I just thought, I can't learn this. And I keep hearing, I meet people, I'm sure you do too, all the time who say, you know, I tried, I couldn't paint, I quit, I stopped. And to me, that's the biggest tragedy in the world.
Well, you know, my teacher was a really smart gal, and she kind of helped build that confidence early. We started out doing a painting of a face. Now, to think of starting out with a face blew my mind. But what we did was we put burnt umber all over the canvas, and then we rubbed out.
You did wipeout.
We did wipeout. And I couldn't believe it, how I could do that. And I came into her the next week with 3 or 4 of them because I was so excited about it. And that was my hook that just got me going. So she found ways to play Mary Had a Little Lamb.
Yeah.
And a couple variations there that got me so hooked that I was ready to learn more.
Now, the next question about learning. I don't know about your first plein air painting experience, but mine was a train wreck. And I was a studio painter working in the back bedroom. And when Lori got pregnant and pushed me out of the house because of the smells, I took the studio easel and the card table and the chair and all these boxes of stuff outside to paint outside. And it was a train wreck, of course, because you're in a different environment. You got flies, you got light changing, clouds moving, everything like that. So is it best to teach plein air painting indoors before taking them outdoors?
Wow. You know, there's probably aspects that are yes and probably some that are no. Obviously, when you have all of this to choose from, it's very difficult. If you have a photograph, and let's go back to your photograph metaphor. I think sometimes you have to learn how to put the paint on the canvas first and feel comfortable with that. And so what I'm saying is that if you took, say, a photograph and you don't copy it, but let's say you build it up, you look at just the value shapes, and you start getting some paint on the canvas and build some confidence, I think your transition to outdoors is going to be easier. If you take the first time you paint, you go outdoors, people are struggling with their equipment, they don't know how to use their brushes, you know, they don't have any sense of the tools. So I would say probably starting indoors is the way to go, and then work yourself outdoors.
Yeah, so in other words, learn the principles of painting, learn to mix color, learn to use brushes, just learn how to paint indoors before you go outdoors. Surprisingly, because of the Plein Air podcast, we've pulled a lot of people into plein air painting that hadn't done it before.
Right.
We had, at the last plein air convention, we had 200 people show up that had never plein air painted. Now, some of them had been artists in other ways, but at least 50 of them had never done a painting in their life. They did their first painting in their life outdoors. Typically, they bought their equipment there at the convention, bought their paint, and then we had mentors working with them. So it can be done, but it's probably not the ideal way.
It's not the ideal way, but you know, somehow you got to jump into the water and get started.
Yeah. Well, so the first time you went outdoors, what was that like for you? to paint. I mean, I know you've been outdoors before.
Right. It's a whole new world. You know, because I was an architect and I knew how to draw in perspective, we went out and painted a mission in San Diego. And so I had a real advantage to be able to at least draw out the shape. But it was, I would never call it a train wreck. I thought it was a learning experience. It was a very positive experience. One of the great things was a few people, you know, who were visiting the mission came around and said, "Oh, I really like that. That's really great."
Oh, that's nice.
And gave me the encouragement. And so like I say, once I started painting outside, it really got me. And I was ready for more.
Now, you've been doing this now for about 15 years?
Right.
Your life has changed completely.
That's correct.
For the people who might be watching this who haven't got the benefit of knowing the life of a plein air artist, talk about, number one, how did plein air painting change your painting and your understanding of painting? Mm-hmm. And number two, how did it change your life?
Well, first of all, I thought I was busy as an architect. I'm busier as a painter.
Are you really?
And I'm a full-time painter. I get up and go out to my studio and get to work at 7:30 or 8 every morning. I'm very disciplined in it. I would say the biggest thing that has changed is that I have this whole new group of friends, the artist nation as we call them, who I'm always looking forward to being with, and I'm always communicating with them. I've got 8 different deadlines going on, whether it's getting ready for an event, going to an event, painting for a show, whatever it is, it's I'm always busy, and I always have to be thinking 3 or 4 steps ahead. So I would say that my life is very broken up into lots of different parts. It doesn't have a continuum like, you know, having an office with 25 employees. It's very entrepreneurial because I not only have to paint the paintings, I have to get them out there in the world to be seen and sell them, and I've got to keep galleries happy. There's, you know, it's a juggling act, but it's so much fun. I cannot wait to get up every morning to see what's coming up next.
Now, you've met a lot of painters, and you hang out with a lot of painters, become friends with a lot of painters. Is you've developed this sense of community as well.
Right.
That's got to be a lot of fun.
And you know, when I started out, the digital revolution had not really started. And I think 15 years back, how different it was. Now, every morning I get up and I can see what people are doing across the country, what paintings they're painting. Are they in the area? Or they'll see I'm in the area and they say, let's paint, or you ought to go to see a show at such and such. There's such a communication. And I can call them up on the phone without a second thought and say, hey, what do you think about this?
People don't really realize how much things have changed. I mean, you realize it, I realize it, but when we started the magazine 15 years ago, I think this month maybe, there were maybe 3 or 4, maybe 5 plein air shows in America, all the way across America. And you know, one of the biggest was in your area, one of the most important was in your area. And you couldn't find workshops, you couldn't find anything, and now there's this flood of stuff, flood of options, workshops, events, retreats, training. You know, you've got these great art schools that are doing all this training. What a difference.
It is, and you know, I wish I had 3 of me that could be out doing all these things. You really have to pick and choose, you know. I've talked with a lot of artists about plein air invitationals. They take a tremendous amount of energy and commitment, and there's some really good ones. And you know, you always want to get into those really good ones, and you want to you want to think twice about doing too many because it'll take too much energy out of you.
So what's that experience like doing a plein air show? If somebody who's watching this that might not have the artist perspective, you know, all they do, maybe they go to a show and they see
Sure.
the guys are all out there painting together and they're doing a show, but what do you have to go through? Let's say you're getting in the car and going, not something local, you're going across the country.
Right.
What's this process like to do a show?
Well, it doesn't start at getting in the car. I will tell you. You know, I think about it a lot before a show. Let's say I've been invited, you know, and I'm going to, let's say, the Forgotten Coast in Florida or the Laguna Invitational. I have usually been to the place before. I've taken photographs before, and I'm thinking about what kind of painting I'd like to do. Because I don't want to just jump right in and look around and say, okay, I'll paint that. I want to think it out ahead of time. It probably comes from my business background. I want to be prepared. But I always try to arrive a couple days before and spend some time looking around, photographing the area, talking to some people, finding out what's the secret spot that if you paint that, it's going to sell. There's a couple places down in Florida like that. And I also like to spend some time with the artist before we're into the competition.
Right.
You know, because when you're in the competition, you want to be up before sunrise, and you're going to try to do a nocturne at the end of the day. And it's very invigorating and can be tiring, because there's also the social aspect at the end of the day.
Right.
But it's more fun than you can imagine. And you really, you know, if you're in a smaller community, people know you're a painter there, that you're doing your job for this invitational. They're incredibly supportive. And then they show up at the gala and they say, oh, I loved when you painted that. I'm going to buy that painting because that's my favorite spot.
And it's so satisfying.
Yeah.
But you're also sitting up at night, touching up paintings, signing them, maybe vernishing them, probably not that, maybe.
Yeah.
But putting them in frames,
Sure.
you know, there's a lot of work involved. I don't think people see how much is really involved.
That is all true, and I'll tell you, when it's all over, you go, how did that happen so fast? And one of my favorite things to do at the end of a show is to do some trading of paintings. So if there's some paintings I have that haven't sold, and another artist has a painting, we'll talk about trading. And we've got 30 traded paintings that I just love. They're jewels.
That sounds like a lot of fun.
Yep, it is.
So this week you've been here doing a video, creating demonstrations and talking about various principles. Tell us what your video is about.
You know where it all started out was that I started thinking about this process of how you accelerate your learning process. And it really started out, I think, 2 or 3 years ago at the Plein Air Convention when I heard a speaker talking about basic exercises that he was doing and looking at fundamentals. So I started forming an idea in my mind about teaching important fundamentals in painting rather than just teaching painting. And then you guys asked me to do this video, so I started writing my thoughts down about it, and I started practicing some of those fundamentals that I was thinking about. And I noticed that my painting progress was increasing faster, and people talked about that when they would see my work. They'd say, there's something different going on in your work. And I'd get those comments on Facebook also. So I felt I was going in the right direction. So preparing for this video, I started developing specific diagrams and ideas on paper that I could communicate in this video to really not just demonstrate how I paint, but demonstrate how I build a painting through strong composition, strong shapes, well-defined value studies. And just like an architect, I'm trying to build a painting like I build a building. You go through all the design process, build the structure, and then the goodies are the exterior skin, the interior, the landscape, everything that you see. But it doesn't hold up, it doesn't stand up unless you've got a strong foundation. So I have put this video together to really communicate to people that they can accelerate their work by building a strong foundation that gets back to what we were talking about earlier. Breaking it down into simple things that you can do that are very learnable for anybody. And I hope that this video achieves that so that someone can take it step by step and build a great painting.
So who is this video for? Is it for the beginner? Is it for the advanced pro who wants to get to another level? Who do you see really getting the most out of this?
Well, I have tried to make it so that it's for someone like me, but it's someone like me throughout the 15 years that I've been painting, because I've learned things along the way that I think are helpful to move you up to the next level, to crystallize some of these ideas about how important a compositional diagram is and how important designing a painting is. You know, so many times we'll see the clouds and we just paint them. But the best painters are designing those clouds. They're designing the composition. How wide open is the window that they're looking at this painting? They're designing the whole thing. And although I'm biased as an architect, I feel that design is so important and it makes the difference. Whether you're a beginning painter or you're an advanced painter, I still think design and some of the fundamentals that I'm talking about are extremely important to consider and reconsider.
Mark, this has been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you for inviting me. I've had a great time.
Great. Well, thanks again to Mark Fehlman and a wonderful interview, and thanks for watching. The video that interview comes from is Design Strategies for Powerful Paintings with Mark Fehlman. I hope you enjoyed it. You can find more about it at lilyartvideo.com. I'm Eric Rhodes. Thanks for tuning in today.
Artist Mark Fehlman knows that 75% of his time is spent on planning, and only 25% is spent on actually painting. Now, he's going to show you how better planning leads to better paintings as he demonstrates his proven theory in design strategies for powerful paintings. If you're willing to do a bit more work up front, you'll find yourself progressing through your paintings with more confidence that the end result will be just as you envision. And Mark is the perfect coach to show you how to work efficiently and effectively so the planning phase becomes enjoyable for you.
In this video, I want to share with you powerful strategies that are going to make your paintings dramatically better. To get the benefits of these strategies, you have to employ them in practically every step of your design and painting process.
From there, Mark puts it all into action. Follow along and see how his solid plan supports each phase as he demonstrates a beautiful seaside painting done from a plein air sketch, photo reference, value, and composition sketches.
Design is everything. I'm always thinking about design as I'm moving through the preparation of a painting and the painting itself. I want to make sure that design is foremost in my mind.
Mark will show you from start to finish how to visually communicate a place so full of beauty that you felt the call to paint it.
We talked about what an athlete does to get better. He's got to work on things every day. It may not be the same thing, but maybe one day it's brush strokes. Another day it's working on composition diagrams. Another day it's looking at alternatives for dark and light shapes and how those work together. These are the fundamentals that are going to advance you in your career and in your drive to be a better painter.
Available on DVD or digital to view on your computer, tablet, or smartphone. Design Strategies for Powerful Paintings with Mark Fehlman is available right now.